Drugs are bad, okay? Well, that was a movie. Hello and welcome back to SimonsRants. I'm Simon, and today I'm going to be giving my first thoughts on the new Scott Cooper film, Antlers. The film is based upon a short story, The Quiet Boy, written by Nick Antosca. It follows a small Oregon town as they are terrorized by a skinwalker. This evil demon-deer hybrid lurks in the shadows and destroys its victims maliciously. A small boy named Lucas, played by Jeremy T. Thomas, has a specific relationship with this monster and he needs help. It's also starring Kerry Russell, Jesse Plemons, and Graham Greene. I've talked briefly before about Scott Cooper on this channel, I believe. I'm a huge fan of his. He's not done that many movies and he doesn't really get that much recognition. I personally believe him to be the most underrated director working today. I think he should be in the same category as the best out there, and he's not even considered that good, or at least his movies aren't. To me, Hostiles was one of the best movies I'd ever seen, and I thought Scott Cooper was able to get one of the best performances of Christian Bale's career out of him. And similarly, I thought that this movie had great direction, great writing, great performances by all the actors, and just a great look and feel to it. I love the ambiance of this film with the use of darkness and light. I thought this movie was a treat to look at and a treat to think about, because as is common with a lot of horror movies nowadays, it's the new popular trend to have allegories built into the story where there's a deeper meaning that the movie on the surface, the story on the surface, is representing. That's my only explanation as to why maybe this isn't as popular or not getting as good reviews, because that style isn't for some reason liked by everybody. I love that. In fact, I would say that most of the horror movies that I enjoy are the ones that have a deeper meaning that is being paralleled in another story, like The Babadook, like The Night House. Those are some of the recent horror movies that have that allegory style and are phenomenal, and I think that this movie, although not quite as good as either of them, is still very good and does that story type very well. But currently, we're sitting at a 58% Metascore and a 6.4 from IMDb users, which is fair. Horror is generally around there. It's rare that it goes much above that, but the 58% is really throwing me for a loop here. The Hollywood Reporter gave it a 90, Variety gave it an 80, Little White Lies, no idea who they are, gave it an 80. Everybody else, much lower. The Playlist, whoever they are, gave it a 25%. That's just unfair to me. This movie, to me, is a 7. I would give it a 7. So I know 6.4 is lower than that. It's not much lower than that, though. So that feels about right. And then the 58% feels like a slap in the face. This movie was good. I enjoyed this movie. Now, like I did say, it is allegorical. And the tough thing about making allegorical stories is you want the story on the surface to flow and make sense as its own story while still making sense as the allegory. And I will say that there was times that the movie only really felt like it made sense when it was being taken from the allegory perspective, the allegorical perspective. The straight narrative felt a little bit sloppy at times. So I get that. That's not perfect. That's why it's not as good as a movie like The Babadook or Night House. But this was still, for the most part, really well done, because even taking it as that straightforward story, it's very entertaining. It's not perfect, but it's entertaining. I love the visuals. I mentioned that it's about skinwalkers, and you don't see him all that often. They try to keep him hidden a lot, which I like a lot, as long as when you do see him, he looks good, and I thought he looked amazing. I thought he really looked awesome. I thought the visuals were astounding. And then, of course, the acting is great, especially Jesse Plemons. I always like him. He's always good, and he delivered a very good performance in this. The only acting that was ever a little bit off was the kids. There's a couple of kid actors in here, and yeah, I think you just have to give kid actors a little bit of leeway. They're not great actors usually. It's very rare that you see children act as well as the adults in the film. That's very rare. They weren't bad either. There was just a couple of moments here or there, and to be fair to them even, a bit of the exposition they had to get through was rough. Some of the conversation just didn't flow like a conversation would in real life, and a lot of that was dropped onto these kids, and it wasn't really their fault. It was a little bit tough to get through some of that expository dialogue, and I don't blame them. It would have been hard for anybody to get through it and make it seem natural. But yeah, those are the complaints I have about this movie. That's very little. I think you could argue the pacing is a bit rushed at times. It's a very short movie, but a lot of horror movies are like that. The one thing that makes this odd is that it's got the horror runtime, but the story and the pacing feels much more like a drama. So the pacing is trying to take its time, and then all of a sudden it kind of had to catch up at the ending. So that is a minor flaw as well. But these are all really minor nitpicks here and there that I'm talking about. Like I said, I would give this a 7. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. It was better than a lot of movies that I've seen this year that have been talked about as best movie of the year candidates, and I thought it was better than a lot of those. So I don't know why this movie is getting the hate it's been getting. It really doesn't deserve it. So I can't recommend it enough. If you like these dark, brooding, kind of depressing, I'll be honest, horror movies, this one's for you. I think that you'll really enjoy it. It may not be your favorite from that subgenre, but it's another installment that is worthy of being considered a good movie. Another good installment by Scott Cooper as well. Everything he's done I've enjoyed, and that track record has kept up with this film, so I can't recommend it enough. I definitely think that more people should go see it, more people should like it, and give it a better rating because it deserves one. So that's what I had to think spoiler-free. I'm going to get into spoilers now, so if you don't want anything spoiled, you should click away, go watch it, come back, and we can talk about it then. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye. So, spoilers. I loved the allegory it was going for. So in case you didn't really pick up on it, or you haven't seen it yet, the basic idea is that it's talking about both abuse, dealing with abuse, and also drug abuse, or any kind of addiction, I suppose, because you see the main character woman stares longingly at alcohol several times, so you know that there's some sort of past there, there's some sort of connection there. Maybe it was because of her father, maybe it was her own personal history, we're not sure, but it goes beyond just the drugs, because they do talk about meth at some points. You see that Jesse Plemons' character is addicted to painkillers, or at least that's hinted at, and then you see by the end that that's probably the case. And then I believe that the dad of the main character child was addicted to opioids. I believe that's what it was. It may have been meth. They talk about both, but regardless, he's addicted to a drug, and that's what the Skinwalker represents, is drug addiction, because it eats you out. Phrasing, because it eats your insides out. It hollows you out and fills you with something monstrous instead, where you hurt the people around you, you become somebody else completely different, a monster, and that's the basic premise of this. But as simple as that sounds, they do it very intricately, and they do it very well. Like I was mentioning, you see throughout the movie, Jesse Plemons is constantly going to grab painkillers. It's never expressed why, you don't know why he's doing it, but then at the end of the movie, after he's been attacked by the Skinwalker, which is how Skinwalkers make more Skinwalkers, he then, too, you see at the very end of the film, is becoming a Skinwalker. And that is the allegory for the drug addiction, the opioid addiction, or meth, or whatever it is. And for him to get into that, he started with the painkillers. They even have a line in there where there's these hanging bags of medication, like just standard painkillers or drugs or whatever, and they say, this is the line, do not pass this, because those drugs, for some reason, ward off the Skinwalker for some reason. That's not completely explained, but there's some sort of fantastical reason behind that. And they lay that out. They say, hey, don't cross this line because the Skinwalker's over there. And so for him, he passed that line. He moved on from just regular painkillers, which is a bad addiction to have to begin with, but he moved beyond that to opioids or whatever it was, to something much worse. That's intricate. That's clever. I really enjoy and like that writing. It's very well done. They do a good job of having a lot of things foreshadowed in the beginning without making it painfully obvious. Like, they have a class. The main woman, she's a teacher, and she's teaching English and teaching writing. The first class that you see her teach, she's talking about what are allegories, essentially. She talks about fairy tales, but what they're talking about is allegories. A fairy tale is something that represents a deeper meaning. So they talk about Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and like, that's a fairy tale that represents a truth that needs to be taught, which in that case is don't take things that aren't yours because it will end badly for you. You'll get eaten by a bear. In this case, we've got the fairy tale of a Skinwalker representing the actual tragedy and the actual horrors and the warning of drug addiction, whatever it is, whether it's opioids, painkillers, whatever it is. I thought that was all handled really, really well. Like I said, some of it flows better as that than it does as a straightforward story about the Skinwalker killing people, because at some points the Skinwalker does things that doesn't make sense. Like, he straight up kills the one cop, but then when Jesse Plemons comes along, he just kind of pushes him deeper into the shed where he can't reach him, and so then he goes around to the other side of the shed and then breaks down the wall and attacks him. And it's like, that doesn't really make sense from like the straightforward narrative, but it ties into the allegory and it works better from the allegorical standpoint. So I think it's very well told for the most part. I thought it was devastating to watch because the kids' dynamic together is very tough to watch. It's heartbreaking, and is the dynamic between the child and both children and their father, who's going through the process of becoming a Skinwalker, is so... it's heart-wrenching, but it's told really well. And so this movie is as depressing as it is scary. Some people may walk away from it being like, man, that was a mood killer, but for me, I thought it was a very, very passionately told story, and it's a warning. It is a fable. Like, I mean, yeah, Goldilocks isn't a happy story either, unless you have heard the adapted version where she runs away and nothing happens to her, and even then, it's kind of anticlimactic. So this is a warning, and it's talking about how it can tear you in two. Like, all of the victims get torn in half. Or, better yet, you see the father, when he fully becomes a Skinwalker, he leaves behind a shell of himself, because he's no longer himself anymore. He was a shell of himself, a hollow shell of himself that was torn apart, and he was replaced completely and entirely by a monster. That's devastating, and it's accurate, and it's very well written. So I don't know who more to credit, Scott Cooper or the guy that wrote the short story, but regardless, I loved the messaging, I loved how it was told, and it was one of my favorite movies of the year. I thought it was really, really good. So if you saw it, what did you think? Let me know in the comments below, and of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you're new here. Thanks, guys. Bye.